We've put these series of sessions together. This is the second to last of this current series, and we hope that you find this and any others that you've attended or next week's helpful. I'd really like to thank the Outward Bound Trust for agreeing to deliver a session to support us, and I'll introduce today's presenter, Ian Davidson, just shortly. Before that, I'll just run through a couple of aspects of housekeeping. You've probably all had Zoom. It's been Zoom central for, I'm sure, many of us recently, and but just a quick reminder. If we just go to the next slide, we will be using the annotations today. So just a reminder, at the top of your screen, there's a green bar. To the next to that is view options. If we drop down and click on annotate, then we've got the option to do some stamps, if you like. I'll just, do this type of thing. So hopefully you're all familiar with that, but if people haven't been using that function, I think that's will be helpful for the session. But we can remind people if that's helpful as we go through. Okay, that's more than enough from me. I would now like to hand over to Ian from the Outward Bound Trust at Estelle, and I'll let Ian introduce himself. Many thanks.
Super, thanks Chris. Good morning everyone, I guess. Thanks for being here, and thanks for inviting me along as well, just to share a few thoughts and hopefully hear a few thoughts from yourselves as well. I guess it's a slightly ambiguous title, but I suppose we kind of came up with something that was hopefully sort of of interest kind of quite widely. So there's a little bit of kind of what Outward Bound's about, some of the stuff that we kind of work on here at Estelle in a kind of early careers context, and some things that we thought might be kind of useful to share with everyone and discuss this morning. So as I say, thanks very much for having me. I haven't done a webinar before, admittedly, so hopefully this goes all right. I did take some advice from the internet on a number of things, so yeah, hopefully we can use all the kind of annotation and chat functions to be fairly interactive. So we'll get cracking. One of the things the internet said was put a picture of yourself up, so we can use the chat function just while I'm going through some bits, and just tell us where your guess is of that picture. So I've got a bit of an odd job title in Learning and Adventure Manager. It's not one that I've heard anywhere else, and I guess it's yeah, it's a bit of a funny one, and it's kind of about our commitment, I suppose, to the blend of adventure and learning through adventure in the wild. So I've been at the Trust for just over 11 years, and I guess the main sort of bits that I'm involved in is sort of managing our training team here, which is sort of 9 permanent folks and about 20 associates. And lots of sort of staff development, lots of stuff to do with safety, and then I guess kind of to some extent overseeing some elements of our kind of early careers delivery to apprentices and graduates across the whole Trust, as well as what we do at Estelle. I've spent a little bit of time in the mountains, and I guess well, I'm the kind of technical advisor for Estelle as well. So I've done a few mountain training courses and always had a great experience. So thanks to any of you that might have been involved in them. And I guess on a personal level, then I really enjoy my mountaineering. I like my big canoe expeditions, and I think my colleagues have probably described that as taking my boat for a walk rather than doing lots of paddling, and a bit of kind of offshore yacht racing as well. So that's me. We've got some correct guesses on Tubcal. Fairly kind of recognisable bit of marker at the summit there. Great. So in terms of, I suppose, Out of bounds, one of those things that's been out there for an awfully long time, kind of, 79 years this year. And it's, I often talk to people and they say, oh, I went on an out of bound course in Norfolk. And I sort of think, well, I don't think we've ever had a centre in Norfolk. So I guess it's become a bit of a byword for outdoor education in some respects. And I guess we're still going strong 79 years later, which is great. And I guess our work's with young people, which for us is kind of 11 to 25-year-olds. And I work at the centre in Eskdale. And our sort of part of that is 16 to 25-year-olds within the kind of early careers world. So lots of apprentices, quite a few graduates, and then a handful of other folk that are in their kind of early careers, but don't quite fit into a scheme, if you like. There's a big sort of restructuring with apprenticeships in sort of 2017-18, where traditionally the folks have been on kind of knowledge and skills, and that had shifted to knowledge, skills and behaviours. So our sort of input, if you like, into apprentice and graduate schemes and supporting early careers is around sort of behavioural development for them in the workplace. So just out of curiosity, we'll try using the annotate function. So just put a tick on the screen if you've ever attended an out of bound course. If you've had a relative attend one. That's ticks. If you've ever worked for out of bound. Ooh, even more. And if you've worked with any of our staff in the past. Super, lots of ticks. So I guess kind of unsurprisingly, lots of you have got some exposure to out of bound already, which is great. We kind of like that. So in terms of kind of the meat of what's coming up, I've got a little bit on kind of human behaviour and what we mean by behaviours, some stuff around developing them for the workplace, that transition from education into employment, and then I guess all of that's including a bit of our sort of approach, if you like, to unlocking people's potential, and then some tools and strategies that I just thought might be useful to share, some things you might be familiar with or some things that may be new. Great. I thought we'd start with a bit of word association. So when I say go, you just need a pen and a bit of paper, and you'll have 10 seconds to just write down as many words as you can associated with the word that I'm going to put on the screen. So hopefully we've all got a pen and a bit of paper ready, or something to note down. And then afterwards, I'm going to show you my list and we'll kind of compare. So this is the word for. Great, right, that's your 10 seconds up. So hopefully you've managed to write a few things down. As I said, I'm going to share my list now, and just put a tick next to any of the words on my list that you've also got on your list. Great, so we've got a few ticks. I'm guessing the fact that not all of them have got a tick next to it means that no one's list was identical, which is pretty rare when I do this kind of thing. And I guess what this is about is we've all got sort of different maps of the world, and those maps kind of help us to navigate the complexities and the nuances of the world. And ultimately, we can all look at an identical word and kind of perceive it in completely different ways. And it's exactly the same with human behaviour or anything else that we're kind of observing in the world. And we might all look at the same thing and perceive it differently, and we're all right potentially. We might all be wrong, or it might not be a kind of case of things being right or wrong. And I guess we've all got kind of some really unique insights we can bring to things because of our different maps, but those maps also create some blind spots for us. And they're, I suppose, maps or ways of navigating the world that are kind of born out of our experiences, out of a kind of nurture rather than a nature. And it's our key to kind of interpreting the world around us. And I suppose it's a useful sort of analogy for just thinking about the type of things that can drive our behaviour. Hopefully we're all kind of familiar with the iceberg sort of concept of there's a little bit above the surface and an awful lot below it. And I guess this is kind of useful to think about how behaviours kind of drive us. So there's some things that we see, which is, you know, our kind of behaviours, our actions, and what others see of us. But there's an awful lot that we don't see that's kind of under the surface. And there are some things kind of near the surface that we might be kind of vaguely aware of ourselves, like our kind of thoughts, how we're feeling at that moment, our kind of attitude towards things. There's stuff that's, I guess, buried a little bit deeper that we might be kind of aware of, but maybe not kind of consciously so, that might kind of make up all of our different experiences, and experiences that kind of form the way we tend to think about things and feel about things, that we're not necessarily conscious that they've driven us to think or feel that way. And then I guess at quite a deep level, then there's our kind of values, things that are very important to us, and our beliefs. And they have a really big bearing, I guess, on the way we sort of interact with the world and our behaviours. And it's not something that we're necessarily very kind of conscious of at the time, but they can be very powerful, particularly values and beliefs. And often, you know, I think about the kind of conflicts that I've had on a personal level with people, and quite often they've been rooted in maybe some kind of different values or different beliefs that we've held. And I think as leaders, you know, whether that's out on the hill with a group of clients, or whether that's leaders within an organisation, leading colleagues, then being in a kind of position of sort of power, I suppose, or authority, I think it's useful to understand our own kind of drivers, because they do influence our behaviour. They kind of have a big influence on how we make decisions, and how we kind of react and perceive the situations around us, the assumptions that we might make about people, about their motivations or their behaviours, and ultimately it might influence things like, you know, what options we decide to give to a group of people, or the options that we decide not to give to them. So really quite powerful, I guess, as kind of influences on our behaviour as leaders. And I think, you know, what we do know is as leaders, we can have a big influence, for good or bad, I suppose, on the people that we're working with, be that kind of clients or staff. So I guess I'd kind of written some bits around behaviour, and I guess it's a world that we live in here at Estelle quite a bit, and then I sort of stopped to think about, well, why is this actually, why do I feel like this is important to share? And I think, you know, having done a fair few kind of mountain training courses myself, and I'm speaking from my own map of the world now, they're pretty much all about being safe. And a lot of them are about leadership, whether that's developing as a leader or developing towards kind of leadership roles. And I think within that kind of leadership realm, then the leader's behaviour very quickly can communicate an awful lot of things to the folks being led. And I guess the big bit, particularly in a kind of outdoor context, is about, are you credible and kind of trustworthy as a leader? Because we can all perceive people's behaviour very, very quickly, and make quite quick judgments, which is a very kind of human thing to do, and almost kind of unconsciously decide whether we want to be led by someone. And we won't necessarily be able to verbalise why we feel like that, what's led us to that conclusion, or even whether there's sufficient evidence to justify the conclusion we've come to. But we've probably made quite a quick conclusion. And I just think about being at a crag with a new group of people, and there's a person who's kind of rocked up late and they've left half their kit at home, and they got the t-shirt on inside out or something. Then I'd probably think twice about whether I wanted that person to belay me without any kind of hesitation. I wouldn't necessarily assume that they were competent at belaying, but they could be the best belayer in the world. They're just not very good at getting ready in the mornings, I suppose. So I've made that kind of judgment in my head quite quickly. And so I guess as leaders, then the awareness of your own behaviours and supports you to perform your kind of leadership role, I guess is why I'm getting at behaviours are important. And so that kind of self-awareness, understanding, what kind of motivates you, what drives you, how do you get the best out of yourself, what sort of things might kind of derail you from being at your best, are all hugely valuable, I think. And taking that awareness from self and applying it to others, you can start to kind of understand how you can begin to develop people at a kind of deeper level through whatever kind of activities in the outdoors or anything else that you might be doing, because you're starting to understand their own behaviour, you're starting to understand their kind of needs, and how your kind of actions as a leader might be impacting them for good or for bad, I suppose. And I suppose it's more than just about saying the right thing as the leader. Your behaviours need to be kind of congruent with your words. And I was thinking about how do I kind of describe that, and I suppose we've got a bridge jump that we use here, which is it's about sort of, I guess, 3 or 4 meters high. It's an old stone bridge, and there's a deep section of river that we can jump into, and I've kind of changed my practice a reasonable amount over the last few years on this, as I've started to kind of think more about my own behaviours. And I guess as the leader, I might say something like, we're going to do a bridge jump, and I want you to challenge yourself. And that's all great. But if my kind of actions when we get there are almost, I'm kind of coercing people to jump off, that might be great for them in the short term, in terms of they've had this, right, I did this. But longer term, I suppose the development we might want to get is that folks are in a position to kind of challenge themselves a bit more. And so where my words might have said, challenge yourself, actually the reality in my behaviours is I've been pushing them, and they've not necessarily felt like they've had a choice. And so one of the things that I think about now is just, describing a bit more accurately how that session's going to look. So I might say, we're going to go for a river swim, and there's an opportunity to do some jumps at the end if you feel like you want to challenge yourselves. That's great from a kind of language point of view, but my behaviours also need to kind of reinforce that, if you like. So, having a more progressive session, starting easy and kind of building up, you can tune into the needs of individuals a little bit more, particularly the nervous ones, and think about the little things that you can do to support them to challenge themselves, and kind of change your behaviour depending on what the needs of the individuals are. And I think that's where the kind of opportunity to maximise the kind of growth and the development in that session kind of lies. And you're starting to address people's kind of psychological safety needs as well. I guess the other bit that I kind of work on, where I think behaviours are quite valuable, is around sort of behavioural safety. And I guess when I work with the trainers here, then as well as some kind of technical aspects, then I try and work with them on a kind of on their sort of values, beliefs, that kind of level, just to support their behavioural awareness as facilitators. But there's a lot of value which crosses over into safety. You know, whether that's about kind of understanding the way that they think, and why they think in a particular way, and how their decision making is affected, that kind of metacognition we'd describe it as. That's a really kind of powerful way to support people's safe behaviours, as well as their kind of technical knowledge, I suppose. And I guess what we've tended to find with the more kind of serious kind of near misses and accidents that we've had is that there's lots of things that occur in that kind of behavioural realm. And I guess what I mean by that is we don't have people tie a figure of 8 incorrectly very often, which I'd kind of describe as a skill. And we don't really have staff find themselves in wildly kind of novel new scenarios that they've got no knowledge of or training for or any kind of reference point for, which is, you know, within that kind of knowledge realm. But I guess a lot of stuff is within that kind of behavioural realm. And so I guess I tend to spend more time around safety, thinking about the kind of behavioural aspects of people's practice, rather than the kind of the minutiae of the kind of technical details. And that's particularly true, I guess, for folks that have fairly recently qualified, that they're quite current with all the kind of technical wizardry of this belay device and that belay device. But there's some things around the behaviours of them as instructors, as leaders, that they can develop and ultimately help them to run safer, higher quality sessions. And so a little example of that would be at a crag, the instructor's got, you know, a small group, maybe bottom roping, and you know, 2 lines working, 2 belayers, and I guess the things I would be, you know, having conversations about with folk might be around their kind of positioning, and why they've chosen to position themselves there, what that position enables them to do or to see, and then what would have to happen within the session for them to change their position. And I guess another example would be around their attention focus. So are they able to sort of describe to me beforehand where their attention will be at various stages during that session, and therefore they're able to direct their attention in a very, very deliberate way, and be conscious that they're getting distracted from where they're intending their attention to be, and that might be a good thing to address something, or it might be a bad thing. So I guess just to sort of start to involve everyone, I guess it'd be really interesting just in the chat to maybe just perhaps share an example of a challenge that you've had around, you know, some of this kind of behavioural safety type stuff, that you might want to discuss a little bit further. So that's one to just put in the chat. And then maybe just with the annotate function, I'd just be really curious to hear what kind of proportion of your time you spend with maybe with your staff, or if you're running kind of instructor courses, you know, thinking about kind of that behavioural side of things, rather than skills or knowledge type stuff. So a little bit, I'm going to go quiet for a moment while you share some bits.
Ian, can I just ask at this point,
Yeah.
Are you happy for people to unmute and ask you a question?
Yeah, absolutely. If that's the easiest thing,
That
then
might
we
be
can do that.
potentially easier for.
Yeah, we've got a little bit of time, so why not? Yeah.
Yeah.
Or if you've got a general question about any of that stuff, then feel free. Super. I guess we can return to some of this. So if folks kind of happy to move on, there's going to be sort of slight change to the topic. So I can repeat the question if you like.
Ian, sorry to interject. There might have been a little bit of confusion about what you were asking. Are you able to repeat that?
So I guess on the screen we've got a 50-50. So that was just what kind of proportion of your time do you spend with, whether you're with staff or whether you may be running a mountain training course. What proportion of your time do you focus on that kind of behavioural side of things rather than skills and knowledge? And then so that's one bit. And then in the chat, if there's something that you wanted to maybe discuss further, or a question you wanted to ask, or a challenge that you're having around behavioural safety, then that's just the place to share that in the chat.
Yeah, Ian, can I just mention something from when I was doing some training years ago, probably pre-ML actually, on the hill, and I guess it relates to the iceberg, and I'm not sure if other people can relate to this, but I was out with a guy who was a good friend of mine, really qualified, and between us, because there's responsibility both sides, I came away from a session that was designed to boost my confidence, feeling absolutely devastated, blown out of the water, confidence in the gutter, and my friend had pushed me, and I clearly hadn't made it clear to them that actually I just was up to here, I'd had enough. So I think I felt that I was exuding a sense of, oh, I've had enough, can we just go home and leave it here, and have been pushed a bit too far. So there's a response. So for me, it comes down to this aspect of behavioural and psychological safety, and how it can be really tricky for both parties to honestly and openly convey what's really going on, that stuff that you've mentioned that you don't see. So I think it's challenging. I definitely reflected on that and what I could have done as an individual to make it more. I thought it was blatantly obvious, but clearly it wasn't, so that two-way bit. And I just think from when I've been instructing, it's hard to check in with everyone and to know what's really going on. And some people are quite good at openly verbalizing that, and other people do it in different ways. So as leaders, I guess what am I getting at? We need to be really mindful of what we project and how that can support and encourage people to open up. I don't know if that's helpful.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And I think
an example, but
people's, the way they're experiencing challenge or nervousness or anxiety, kind of, it doesn't necessarily manifest itself in them sitting at the back biting their fingernails. And I guess one of the things I tend to look for working with folks over a long period of staff, or just with over sort of 5 days with clients, then tends to be just shifts in their behaviour. So I might not understand what it is at that moment in time, but I know that there's something different going on, and that's something to kind of investigate. It's quite an interesting question from Kat there about climbing coaching and working with values, and how do you do that? I guess that's a big topic in itself. There's lots of books about this, but I've got a fantastic book that's called Coaching with Values, that I guess it supports me just about having kind of conversations and tools, strategies for talking about values. And I think the values bit is sort of almost like getting to the root of what's important to people, what's kind of motivating them, because often the thing that we think isn't necessarily the kind of deep-rooted thing that's driving us. So it's difficult to do. I'm still, I'm definitely not kind of good at it. I'm still kind of figuring out good ways to do it. But yeah, there's some stuff out there that it's a big conversation at the moment, but I'll be happy to share some stuff that I've got if you want to know a bit more about coaching with values. I guess I'm just reading the chat now. I'm getting distracted by it. There's a lot to kind of discuss and chat through there, but I think if we're happy to kind of move on, just put a green tick somewhere on the screen, and then there might be some bits we can kind of come back to with questions at the end. Super. I'm seeing some ticks, so we'll move forwards. So changing tack slightly and just thinking about kind of workplace behaviours. I guess I really value the outdoors as a medium for development, really, and mainly because I think it's a pretty level playing field. Particularly for folks that haven't had much experience of kind of adventure sports type stuff. But it doesn't really matter whether you're the kind of apprentice or the chief executive. If you're both tying onto the rope at the bottom of a climb, then it's the same kind of challenge. Your title, your qualifications, etc. If you work in a different field, doesn't really have any bearing on that challenge. And so it's a great environment for setting aside the kind of the social and the kind of organisational hierarchies, etc., that might exist within a workplace, and coming to a kind of pretty level playing field to have your kind of shared experience. And I guess, we've been doing that for quite a while at Outward Bound, and 1941 things started kind of, with a bit of just doing and a bit of concrete experience for people as it's described. And over time, I guess we've kind of added an awful lot into our kind of learning process that is aimed at making the learning more kind of deliberate and explicit rather than sort of incidental and implicit. And I guess lots of that's about kind of reflective practice, whether that's reflecting beforehand and really thinking about things, and a bit of active experimentation. The concrete experience is still really important because it creates, I suppose, the memories that the learning kind of relate to, and then that kind of reflective time afterwards, in review, to discuss, to analyse, and ultimately all of that's leading towards what Cole kind of described as abstract conceptualization, which is big fancy words, but I suppose is about creating links to other stuff. So you're drawing some conclusions and you're starting, in our context here, then that's starting to think about, well, how would I apply this learning back in the workplace? And I guess that's the kind of real critical kind of conversations that we're having during the program here. And the thing that enables you to translate experiences in the outdoors to be relevant to all manner of workplaces. One of the things I got asked very early on working with apprentices was, what's this got to do with kitchen fitting? There was a lot more expletives in there, but that was the kind of general gist of it. And I suppose it was fairly straightforward to answer, but it was about focusing on those kind of transferable skills, whether that's just, kind of understanding of your own behaviour, whether that's understanding other people's, your ability to kind of interact with them or at a team level. It might be some stuff around kind of leadership or solving problems, resilience. All of these things kind of can transcend the kind of the boundaries of the activity that you're kind of doing. But that transfer back to the workplace is, I guess, the key element within our practice here. So just as a little, I guess, kind of a poll type thing, then just give us a tick on the screen if you kind of fairly regularly work with people in the first sort of like 3 years of their career. Super, we've got some ticks already. And I guess you've probably experienced that that's a really big shift for folks coming out of education and going into employment, and is a really big kind of, it's a big change. The culture of a workplace, whilst they vary a lot, is probably going to be very difficult to the kind of educational environment that they've been in up until that point. And for lots of kind of folks starting, whether it's apprenticeships or graduate schemes, or just going straight into employment or other training jobs, then they've quite often had a kind of summer off beforehand. So it can be a big kind of culture shock. And I guess there's a lot of new expectations of them, you know, whether that's about being more kind of self-sufficient, being accountable, whatever it might be, there's probably some new kind of new expectations of them. And in thinking about a useful way to kind of summarize this, it kind of reminded me a little bit of the work that Viktor Frankl did. So he wrote a fantastic book called Man's Search for Meaning, which is kind of a sort of reflection on his time in various kind of concentration camps during the Second World War. And he talked about this opportunity, our ability to choose our response. And so where for particularly young folks in a kind of, you know, as a child, if you like, as a young child, there's a stimulus and you kind of respond to that in a sort of almost impulsive fashion, if you like. And I guess, you know, in the workplace, then there's a reasonable expectation that there'll be a stimulus and you need to think about how you're going to respond, and be thoughtful in how you choose to respond, and professional, etc. And I guess for young people, then at some point they've got to transition from one of those kind of ways of acting to another way of acting. And I guess what we know from, or what is probably fair to say from, you know, what industries and different sectors are kind of telling us is that education is not kind of particularly successful at developing behaviours for the workplace, even if it's very successful at developing the kind of skills and knowledge that folk need. And so I guess that's kind of, you know, that's sort of what we've been working on here. And I guess just to bring this to life, I thought I'd read a little story that I think is quite kind of relevant at this point. So it's about an emperor moth. A man found the cocoon of an emperor moth. He took it home so that he could watch the moth come out of the cocoon. One day, a small opening appeared, and he sat and watched the moth for hours as it struggled to force its body through the tiny opening. The moth seemed to be stuck and appeared to have stopped making progress. It seemed as if it had gotten as far as it could, and it could go no further. The man, in kindness, decided to help the moth. He took a pair of scissors and snipped off the remaining bit of the cocoon. The moth emerged easily, but its body was swollen and small, its wings wrinkled and shriveled. The man continued to watch the moth because he expected at any moment the wings would expand to support the body, which would contract in time. Neither happened. The moth spent the rest of its life crawling around and was never able to fly. The struggle required for the moth to get through the tiny opening was necessary to force fluid from the body of the moth into its wings so that it could be ready for flight. Freedom and flight would only come after the struggle. I guess that story always makes me quite thoughtful about my behaviours as a leader, and the extent to which I use authority or expertise to kind of teach or to dictate, to lead, and what that might create over a longer period of time. And so with our programs here, and also in terms of how I work with my colleagues here, then a lot of this is about facilitating autonomy in the learners. And at the start of the program, we might be quite far left, if you like, on this kind of on this chart. So this is adapted from Tannenbaum and Schmidt Leadership Continuum for anyone that's interested. But far left, so a lot of I guess time spent dictating, telling, etc. Doesn't give a lot of freedom necessarily for the learner to grow. And as through the course of a program here, then we start to kind of hand over in a very deliberate way some freedom, some autonomy for the learners. So transitioning from more of a kind of teaching directive approach towards a kind of coaching non-directive approach, where folks have supported with the right kind of details, but ultimately they've got some areas of freedom to kind of learn and to grow. And that I guess is sort of, probably talk for hours on this, but that kind of illustrates the theme, if you like, where we need to let people struggle a little bit. We need to let people think about it for themselves, and that's where the opportunity to grow kind of comes from. I guess just to kind of round up, then I was thinking about what are some kind of practical examples or things that I do, I've seen other people do, which support that kind of autonomy and development, support people to have their own struggle and to grow. And I'll share a few examples, and I guess if there's things that crop up, then we'll have an opportunity for kind of a bit of discussion and questions, etc. So I guess all of this is about sort of facilitating autonomy, and the first bit is, I guess, around purpose, and I suppose bearing in mind that everyone has a different purpose, whether it's for attending a course or even a purpose for that kind of day, or of doing something in a particular way. And as a leader, then I'm always very conscious about trying to communicate my purpose in a really clear manner, but also try to understand the kind of collective purpose or the individual purpose, if you like, because that can be quite a unifying thing. I'm sure we've all kind of set off on days out, whether it's with clients or with colleagues or friends, and we've maybe had completely different purposes for the day. And in not sharing them, they might rear their head later on in the day when it's a little bit late. So that's kind of the first thing, about having a purpose that we can all kind of understand and buy into. And then I guess kind of, maybe adding a bit more detail to that, then sitting down with, whether it's with a group of staff or with a group of clients, even at the start of the day, to just think about what are their sort of personal success criteria for the day. And I use this quite often when I'm out on the mountain with groups, as an aid to decision making, both beforehand but during the day as well. And starting to think about what's important for the individual in terms of their success criteria, and then kind of bringing those together collectively for the group. And I had some quite interesting experiences with groups that have had some really defined success criteria and then had a lengthy decision making process on the hill that's resulted in deciding to turn around and not go to the top, even though that was, if we just had a discussion, the loudest voices probably would have won, and the group would have made maybe the wrong decision. And I think as the leader, you can then sort of throw some questions into folk about, okay, well, which of these would you be willing to sacrifice first if we couldn't achieve all of them? So that can be, I think, quite a powerful sort of exercise just to support the autonomy of the group in making decisions for themselves. I guess the next one I thought about was that kind of, you know, am I cutting the cocoon for people? And actually, I think I'm nurturing them. And reflective practice is really important for that. And I think the kind of peak of that, if you like, is in being able to reflect almost in the moment, and recognise that our behaviours as leaders might be counterproductive in the kind of long run. And the example I'd give for this is, you know, sometimes with apprentices at 16, 17, 18, I still get asked, am I allowed to go to the toilet? And I could say yes or no, which would be easy. I think if I was to answer like that, what I'd be communicating is that the system of asking for permission, we need to perpetuate that, and you need to have my permission to do some things. And so I don't tend to answer questions like that with a yes or a no. It tends to be, have you talked to your colleagues about whether this is an appropriate time to take a break? You know, and that could be for, you know, someone wants to go and smoke or go to the toilet or lunch or whatever it might be. I don't need to hold on to that kind of decision, if you like, as the leader. I guess there's a little bit of personal goal setting, and we kind of do quite a lot of this in our programs here, because we know it's really effective for helping individuals to direct their own learning. But I think that the context here within kind of setting some goals individually and then kind of sharing those within the group is, it introduces a little bit of peer accountability, to, you know, I've committed kind of publicly, if you like, to trying to do something in a different way today, or you know, trying a harder grade climb or whatever it might be. And so there's that accountability that comes from sharing it, but there's also the kind of support that you might get for something that you're working on. And I think, you know, it also sets up an opportunity further down the line if you wanted to set up some feedback between the group, whether that's between staff or clients, etc. Then this kind of sets that up quite nicely. I guess all of these are kind of examples of kind of transformational approaches to leadership, rather than transactional approaches. And I think probably some of the early mountain training courses I did over a decade ago, then there's lots of kind of very transactional leadership approaches. Like, I need you to do this or you're going to fall off. I need you to do this, or someone else is going to get hurt, etc. And I think increasingly, as I've been working in a development capacity, thinking about my own practice and developing our staff, then I'm kind of leaning more towards, well, there's some things I can set up and choices I can make that mean I can say to a group, this is your area of freedom, here are some boundaries, and go and explore kind of within that. You know, you still need to be capable of that directive leadership because sometimes it's required, but wouldn't it be great if we just use that when we need to, and we give people the freedom to grow in the kind of individual ways when we've got an opportunity to do that. And I guess the kind of the bit that I'm kind of moving towards with my practice, or I'm conscious that I want to move towards, is just around kind of coaching, and that's what I do a lot of with my colleagues here and with the clients as well. And so a little example of that in a kind of technical sense, I suppose, it might be getting asked the question of, like, have I done this right? And again, it's easy to say yes or no, but the bit that supports someone's growth and development might be a response that's like, well, what would indicate if you had done it wrong? And so we're asking people to think about things. We're introducing some kind of self-check-in strategies, and that feeds into both our kind of behavioural safety and their kind of awareness of their own behaviours as well. Great. So transformational, that's where we like to go. I guess that's the end of the bit that I'd kind of prepared and the things that I wanted to share. So I'd just invite any questions that you've got, or anything that you maybe want to discuss some things further. Then my kind of email address is there, and I'd just invite everyone to get in touch if there's anything that you wanted to share or to discuss further, whatever it might be. So feel free to, I don't know, could we fire away in the chat, or do you want people to just unmute and...
Yeah, thank you, Ian. Either really, but let's just see what unfolds for a few minutes. Yeah.
There are some quite interesting comments in the chat. Do people want to unmute and share their ideas from earlier?
I think one of the challenges that people have when they're delivering courses is the time. You know, they've got such a full-on schedule, if you like, to get through everything. As sort of Stuart, made a comment earlier, introducing models and talking about that stuff is,
yeah, absolutely,
challenging.
Yeah, I mean, it of course, the kind of the elephant in the room of that side of things, I suppose, is it doesn't matter what your behaviours are if you don't know how to tie a figure of 8, for example. So there are some basics that you need to start with, and I guess this is the focus on the behaviours within my work is I think particularly relevant for folks that are kind of, relatively newly qualified, and they're starting to, maybe find themselves in scenarios that are directly like the experiences they've had leading up to or during assessment, for example. And there's some different behaviours that are required there. So one example might be, supervising a group of clients who are doing a bit of rigging for a climbing session. That's not something that I did on my SBA assessment, and I don't think it's part of the syllabus now, but it's something that you might find yourself doing, and there's some thought and some different kind of behaviours required for working in that context. I'll just read this out. So be keen on your thoughts about standard of instructors' personal development skills that you get coming to Outward Bound if they haven't had much formal teaching outdoor uni course. That's really interesting. It's hard to generalise. I guess at Estelle, we tend to take people that have got an awful lot of experience of personal development, because they're quite intense programs with quite, lots of very intelligent young folks that are, young adults basically. So they do need a reasonable degree of experience here, but it's not necessarily about the theoretical knowledge, if you like. It's more about the kind of application of that in terms of, are they comfortable having a coaching and mentoring conversation with someone? What's their awareness of their own behaviour like? Those are all things that I'd kind of look for in folks coming through. But across the whole organisation, then it varies, and we've got all sorts of internal kind of training and resources, etc., to be able to support people. So I think whilst thinking back to when I joined Outward Bound, I had a bit of personal development kind of experience, but actually I was probably not as much as I thought I had at the time, to be honest. And yeah, I guess my role and my kind of peers as learning venture managers across the trust, and that's a big part of our job to support people both with that kind of technical aspect and the real kind of purpose of people being here around the development side of things. Hopefully that answers your question in a bit of a waffly way.
Yeah, thanks for that.
And if you want to discuss anything like that further, then get in touch by all means. Super.
And I think, obviously, because I know this because I've had involvement, but the trust has undergone a huge sort of shift in some ways with regard to the approach to coaching over the last few years, and that commitment, if you like, to that aspect of training and development. And I guess it sounds, Ian, like that's been, it's been utilised practically, really effectively.
Yeah, I think it's probably something that existed at a delivery level, if you like, in Estelle for quite a while, just the nature of the people that we're working with. But as a kind of organisational, cultural sort of leadership and approach to development, then yeah, I think that's definitely been introduced and hopefully successfully used in the last few years, and it's still kind of growing and developing. And I think, as with any new skill, you kind of, you get a new hammer and you want to hit loads of things, and some of those things you might hit are not always nails. So yeah, it's developed my practice immensely. Just coaching and mentoring, and lots of kind of successes and a fair few kind of failures early on as well, which is part of that struggle.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I guess what I'd say is thanks for kind of listening. I had lots of things to share, and thanks for your interaction. It's always, it's great to be able to share some things, and to just hear some snapshots of different perspectives as well. And as I say, my email's there, so feel free to get in touch and chat through anything. But yeah, thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Ian. I think, just as usual, we really welcome the feedback from everyone. So, huge thanks to the Outward Bound Trust and to Ian for giving his time, and to everyone for coming along this morning. If we can just get to the final slides, Ian, just before we close, that lovely. Thank you. So we have one more session, which hopefully will be of interest and use to you all. So that's next Tuesday morning, where we have Tim Newman from Ordnance Survey. So thanks again, everybody. As I say, and I think there might be some references that we can, Ian might share with us, that we can put on the edited version when that goes out. A couple of texts, I think, that you referred to, in that might be helpful for people. So we'll add those. Great. All right, everybody. Well, thanks again, and enjoy your Wednesday. Okay, and take care, and do send in your feedback, and we'll look forward to seeing you in the future. Thanks very much, everybody. Take care. Bye.